and what do unparliamentary language, a political podcast that has lost the plot, really. How are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm very well, as always. I really like these sort of live, straight after politics has just happened episodes, because we have loads of people in the chat. Hello to everybody in the chat. That's really, really exciting. And we've got stuff to talk about. So let's get on and do it.
Yeah, we'll move on straight on. No headlines this week. We'll just barrel straight on into Brexit, as I think that's a previous episode title. So instead, Theresa May, you live in interesting times. What happened today? Why is today important? Why is this week so crazy?
So this was the week that we were going to decide what happens with Brexit once and for all. The clock has been well and truly run down with about 2 weeks to go until we leave. So this was the point where May put her deal on the table and said, right, this is the second chance. Let's go ahead and see if you approve it and we can get this Brexit done with. We can all go down the Winchester and have a nice pint and wait for this all to blow over. However, she has been defeated with, as one of my listeners has just pointed out, the fourth biggest parliamentary loss in history by 149 votes, which is quite an astonishing defeat. As somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, oof indeed.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion we had earlier was, I can't remember if you were in the same chat. I've chatted with a lot of people today about what I thought was going to happen.
Had we recorded on Sunday, obviously that would have been recorded live. That would have been recorded and would have gone out by now. But I think the estimates I saw was going to be 190, which was obviously less than the 230 we had previously. But still, even 150, 149 as is still bad. That was 40 people, 40 people changing sides, but still definitely not enough to make the deal go through. I think probably the main thing people have seen today, if they're paying attention to the news, that the DUP and the ERG were both against the apparently legally binding changes that went through yesterday evening. But essentially, the summary of that is they weren't that great as changes go. This is the actual advice from the Attorney General. And he said, it may be thought that if both parties deploy a sincere desire to reach agreement and the necessary diligence, flexibility and goodwill implied by the amplified duties set out in the joint instrument, it is highly unlikely that a satisfactory subsequent agreement to replace the protocol will not be concluded. But as I have previously advised, this is a political judgment, which given the multiple incentives of the parties and the available options and competing risks, I remain strongly of the view it is right to make. So I think the point is they're saying there's not really a legal thing here. It's more kind of political good faith from the EU. So I think that's the problem that a lot of people had, is they wanted something legally binding which would allow us to leave the backstop. Not have to worry about the backstop and not necessarily be beholden to it.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And there was a bit of political teasing before the vote as well. So Theresa May comes back from her talks with the EU leaders with, quite frankly, not very much. But if you'd had a look at the British papers today, you would have thought very differently. I think the Mail, the Express, the Telegraph, and the Sun all led with, oh, brilliant, the PM sorted out the deal, now let's get behind it and vote it through. So there may have been a little suspicion there that maybe enough MPs would have been swayed by May's argument to vote for it. In fact, I even read earlier today that a few of them said that the government privately reckoned that if this was a private vote where nobody had to vote for or against it and their names be published somewhere, that their deal would pass. But the problem was that too much political capital had been invested in dismissing her deal already, that it was a bit of an embarrassing climb down to go against it now. The Attorney General's advice coming from it, his interpretation, certainly put one nail in the coffin when he suggested that there was still a possibility for the backstop to go on legally, and the next nail in the coffin was the DUP rejecting it. That news came at about 2:30 today, and from that moment it became really hard to see how Theresa May would ever have the political arithmetic to get that vote passed. And I think that in turn actually gave the ERG and Jacob Rees-Mogg a bit more freedom to vote against it. If the DUP had voted for it but the ERG hadn't, then that might cause people might question the reasons for them going against their party. It's important to point out this is a whipped motion, so the Conservatives expect the Conservatives to follow the party line, and approximately 75 of them didn't tonight, including Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Ian Duncan-Smith.
So what you're saying is they didn't whip it real good.
Exactly. Yes, I'm glad you can bring some important political analysis to this conversation.
Yeah. So I mean, I've posted. I'm not sure how readable that will be if it's in the show notes, but there is currently on the BBC website. There's the live stream of like reactions. Any kind of important articles that come out of that, I will make sure to throw in the show notes. I mean, there's loads going on, but I think there's been a lot of responses from EU politicians in the wake of the vote tonight. I think most of them kind of expected. Well, actually, I'm not sure. I mean, I think they hoped this would go through because that's what they hoped before. But I don't know how much they were expecting given what happened last time. And was this the EU's plan all along? I don't know if you listened to the Brexit cast, but they were talking about the EU seemed quite happy with the idea of an extension, but there are complications to that. But they're kind of happy with the idea of an extension if it can end up with a reasonable deal. But what other deal can we get that's different from this?
Well, yeah, that's exactly the question that the EU are asking. So part of this tonight is, I'll quickly run down what will happen after this because it leads to a possible extension. So now this has been rejected, MPs will go and vote on deal or no deal, essentially, tomorrow. Do they want to leave no deal on the table or not? If they vote against the no deal, then they have to vote for if they want to have an extension. Now, it's all very well the UK saying, yes, we want an extension and yes, we want to do it. However, the EU is the one who has to accept that request. And Donald Tusk and I believe the Dutch Prime Minister and quite a few have already come out on Twitter saying that they need to see a plausible reason why the UK wants to extend this. Or, in other words, why, what's your plan? What are you going to do? What is the alternative plan that Theresa May is going to bring to the Commons that will pass? Because the EU, as far as they're concerned, they've done all their work so far. They don't have to do anything else. So, yeah, I think the EU obviously will, want to avoid no deal. I'm not quite sure if they wanted Theresa May to lose tonight. I think quite a few of them would have actually been quite happy for it all to be over. They're happy with the deal that they've put on the table, I would assume, if all 27 have agreed to it. There's no discussion within the EU if that's a good deal or not. It's the UK, unfortunately, that is the problem, is the sticking point in this negotiation. And it is the view of this host that we are probably the laughing stock of Europe because of it.
I think just circling back to your point about them wanting it to go through, I think honestly they did want the deal to go through, as you say, that there were 27 countries that approved it. But I mean, they can't have been. They're savvy enough politicians. They must have known that there was a slim chance this going through, even with the concessions, which I think is probably why the concession was quite slight. It was something. Theresa May's like, I can use this as a bargaining chip, but really, they've given us what they're going to give us, and there isn't that. I mean, they've always said there's no more room for negotiation. Okay, there was a tiny bit, but it wasn't like fundamentally changing the deal on the table. And I think that was the problem. They sometimes say I've sometimes seen people being like, oh, the EU will realise and stuff like this, and I think, I don't know, I don't think they're so naive to think that a few minor changes like the ones they gave us last night would be enough to massively swing this vote. And yeah, so now we've got this bumper rollercoaster week ahead of us. So we have this vote tonight. Tomorrow, hopefully this episode will go out ahead of that. Tomorrow there is the vote on no deal, and then after that there's a vote on the extension. We've got here the terms, which I'll post in the chat as well. The terms for tomorrow's vote are that this House declines to approve leaving the European Union without a withdrawal agreement and a framework on the future relationship on the 29th of March 2019, and notes that leaving without a deal remains the default in UK and EU law unless this House and the EU ratify an agreement. So yeah, no, this House declines to approve leaving the European Union without a withdrawal agreement. So that essentially translated into English is we want to make sure we have an agreement. So we won't have a no deal. However, the second part,
that says, and notes that leaving without a deal remains the default in UK and EU law. So that's saying that if nothing happens, if we still get to the 29th of March and the House of Commons has not agreed to extend it in any way, then we will leave without a no deal as just the default measure, because Article 50 has started. We cannot stop that. All we can do is extend it or revoke it, and that would need the EU's permission. The Parliament cannot do that by themselves.
And so that's why we have the follow-up motion on Thursday, which is, are we okay with having a deal? Are we okay with having an extension of Article 50, which then has to go back to the EU? And of course, then the final thing is whether can we revoke Article 50 itself, which I believe we have the legal advice on that is possible, but we're cutting it very close to the line at the moment.
Yeah, I believe the statements from the EU have come out and they've been very open, saying, yeah, sure, you can revoke it any time. But I think the EU would still have to have some rubber stamp in that motion. Yeah, a lot of people in chat saying that we can revoke unilaterally. I assume that was the case, but I assume that maybe the EU would be very happy with that. I'm just surprised that they wouldn't want some say in it. But
and it might just be I can't remember. I haven't reread Article 50 recently. So yeah.
Quickly going back to the vote tomorrow, then. So the next step on the no deal. So one of the interesting things about this is that it's a free vote, which means there are no whips involved. The parties can vote on their sort of conscience rather than the MPs can vote with their conscience rather than what the party says. This is really important for Theresa May because it means that she avoids a load of resignations from her cabinet. I believe that cabinet will be split on this issue, and there'll be some who will want a no deal, and there'll be some who want to have some form of withdrawal agreement. May herself has already come out and said that the withdrawal agreement in some form is her preferred option. So I think it's really likely that no deal will fail tomorrow, essentially. There doesn't seem to be a clear one. I don't think it will be the mystery of tonight or sort of worry about what will happen. No deal will be finally taken off the table. If you're playing Brexit bingo, take a shot, because that's the one thing I've heard again and again and again. But it's really what comes next, the third vote, that is really interesting, and where a lot of political commentators and myself just sort of shrug and go, I don't know what happens after that. I could not tell you if the House is for extending Article 50 or not. I don't know if you've got an opinion on the matter, Tom.
I mean, I'd like to think that the people who have been opposing Theresa May's deals are doing so because they honestly think they have the best. So obviously we know there are some people who are the strong Brexit group who just want to go out on no deal. But them aside, I would like to think that the Labour MPs, etc., who we know are generally pro-Remain, even if Corbyn might not be himself, as we discussed in previous episodes, I'd like to think in general they want to come to some kind of arrangement and therefore would vote for an extension so that we can maybe sort something out. And I think the main concern is whether 3 months or even 6 months is enough. And one thing I want to drop in that could be interesting is we have EU elections coming up. With the original revocation of Article 50, we would be out before those elections happen. If we extend that, it puts us in a very weird position where we're on the way out. But say we're told say we end up getting a 6-month extension, that's enough to get us to the EU election. So we technically are all still EU citizens, should be able to vote in that election. And that's just possibly the weirdest kind of thing that's come out of this mad dash at the end that may go one way or the other. But yeah, my opinion is probably we will vote to extend, and then we'll vote to extend, and then we'll see what the EU say. I get the impression from the stuff I've been listening to and reading about that they want probably a 3-month extension because they don't want to keep giving us infinite extensions, as it were. So by giving us a short extension, it still puts some pressure on us.
Yeah, it does, and the worry for that short extension is that if Theresa May is still in charge, what withdrawal agreement does she present Parliament with? Does she simply go back with the same thing for a third time? The same premise that has been, defeated by quite large margins on every single occasion that she's put it to Parliament so far, with no view of getting it through. That's why the EU might be a little wary about giving us an extension if Theresa May is Prime Minister. I'm not quite sure if they would force her out or do anything like the EU wouldn't force her out, but it might be in the party's interest or in their country's interest to have somebody different go into those negotiations. At least they would have a different deal to get through Parliament. That's where Jeremy Corbyn's first suggestion, after the vote was announced and after Theresa May sort of laid out her terms and what would happen after this vote, he said, call a general election. Calling a general election in the next 2 weeks would be impossible and couldn't happen, but under an extension, depending on the length of that, it certainly could. So that may be one option to get a deal passed. I think it's very unlikely, but it's certainly a scenario that could happen, and one that Labour would be very keen to see happen. Although looking at the polls, there is no guarantee that a Labour Prime Minister would be the result of a general election campaign.
Yeah, I think. I think if we said we wanted a general election, that would be a very good reason to give the EU to give us an extension. With their hope being that a new government would come in who would, break the deadlock one way or the other. Either find going without a deal because we've got a very Leave government, or we're deciding to stay because we have a very Remain government. Considering how split the country is, I still think that would be hard. But I suppose all you need is a cabinet that can push through a deal one way or the other. I don't know. It's not something we can. It's not something that's easy to speculate about, because if we had a general election, the MPs we currently have could change, and different constituencies may be voting on Brexit or not. And I have no real idea what the makeup of that future Parliament would be. So, yeah, I don't think I have any chance of calling what that would be like.
That's such a hard thing to do at this moment in time. I think if a general election was called, let's go fully on track into this sort of like fantasy world where one is called. When we had the general election back in 2017, a lot of people thought it would be fought on Brexit, when in fact it was fought on a very different platform. It was kind of the Conservative austerity against Jeremy Corbyn's, desire for a more left-wing platform. I think that's what really captured voters in that election, and they saw, Brexit will sort it out itself. I think, and another one of those driving factors in 2017 was that many people who voted Labour, in my opinion, did so to stop a massive Conservative majority, one that was predicted as a result of the 2017 election, and to stop a very hard Brexit that would have gone through easily if we had a Conservative majority, in my opinion. So having all of these, with all those factors in place, the 2017 election that was meant to be about Brexit wasn't really run on that form. Now, call one in 3 months, it could only be about Brexit and could only be about whose policies can get through the EU. That I would like to see, because then we might get some much needed clarity from particularly the opposition parties on where they stand. I think it's been quite a sort of like a repeated mantra that people are not sure where Labour stand on Brexit. Do they want a second vote? Do they want a second referendum? Or do they want to press ahead with Jeremy Corbyn's plan? I think Jeremy Corbyn's plan is to try and do both. Go ahead with his EU ideas, and if that's rejected, then put it to a public vote. But in that scenario, that general election would have to be the Brexit election, and I don't think it could be run on anything else.
So maybe scaling back a bit from that very hypothetical situation of a general election, which I imagine is not the general will of Parliament at the moment, and even if Labour table a general election a general election motion, I imagine that the Conservatives would shoot it down. They'd close ranks again because they're in power. Why would they want to lose that? maybe there's some ERG people who think they'd do well out of that, but I think in general we think they'd close ranks with the government on that. So what's like the next thing down? I mean, so people have been saying, Nicky Morgan has been saying Theresa May, her position is untenable, but we know she survived the vote of no confidence within her party earlier in the year. So, and she also survived a parliamentary vote of no confidence. So, wait, sorry, did we have a parliamentary vote of no confidence?
Well, yes.
I was in the government, not in Theresa May, right?
It was in
it's
the government.
It's an important distinction, yeah. So, so she has slightly less than a year left in the as Conservative leader, if she, before they can vote on her again with letters to the 1922 committee. So the only way to get her out really is convincing her behind the scenes to step down, but she's not yet shown any willingness to do that. So I don't think that's likely either.
No, it's bizarre. I think most other leaders would have resigned in this circumstance, because it's really untenable. Like, your flagship policy has been defeated several times, and not by small margins, by big margins. So to keep going ahead with that, and the thought that she may have a third vote on the same policy if she's still leader, it kind of reinforces the fact that with Theresa May, you get this deal that's been negotiated. There is nothing else. So the only alternative is to remove her or for her to step down. I'm not really seeing her logic in staying on at the moment, other than who else is going to take it. I think there is certainly a leadership vacuum within the Conservative Party, and maybe within the Houses of Parliament, or at least who can tenably be a leader that can unite the country. There's not many figures who stand out amongst the current crop. And yeah, as Ask Who in the chat says, she has one great skill: hanging on, despite everything. And that's all she can do for now. But did you see her reaction straight after the vote? And I don't wish to be cruel and play personal politics. Her voice went again, like it did at the Conservative Party conference, and I'm not sure if it's just her being unfortunate or if it's a nervous thing that, at moments when, of great importance, that her voice goes. But to me, she didn't strike a very convincing leadership figure. I mean, it's even more hard to be a convincing leader when you've just been defeated by 149 votes. But I don't think she projected a persona of someone who was sort of iron-willed and going to hang on despite all. She appeared to me as somebody who was hanging on by her fingernails and didn't really want that job, but knew that she was the only person willing to do it, so she had to carry on.
Yeah. No, so I hadn't seen it at the time, but I have seen it since in one of the links about the MPs rejecting her deal. I mean it's her voice has definitely gone for whatever reason in that video, and it doesn't show strength in a traditional way, but she has the ability to carry on. We've seen it before, so I think she's just going to keep trying. Is my opinion of what she wants. I think the same joke has been made by nearly everyone I've been chatting to, and some people in the chat as well. That doesn't she look tired? Which is the David Tennant line as Doctor Who that destroys the Prime Minister in that. So,
but she does, though.
I mean, she does. I mean, but wouldn't you? You're super stressed with all of that going on. So, I can understand.
If she wants to reflect the mood of the nation, then she's doing a great job, because everybody's tired. I'm really tired. Thought it would be sorted out by now, and nothing has happened. Yeah, and that's a really good point. Leading a nation is stressful, even during quiet times. But right now, I think it's peak levels of stress, even for anybody who got this position. I think when the Conservatives tried to, look at who they could replace David Cameron with back in 2015, that leader might have thought they had a difficult job, but I don't think any of them would have predicted that they would be facing the gridlock that they see in Parliament today.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were multiple candidates running, and I mean, Theresa May got picked in that kind of anointing way that happens with the Conservatives. But yeah, they all seem to be up for it. They were like, "Oh, this looks like a challenge that's going to be fun." And I'm impressed by her stamina with all of this. It must be so hard. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't want to. I completely separate Prime Minister, but Gordon Brown was recently on a podcast with David Tennant where he talks about the pressure of having everyone like watching you, whatever you do and say all the time, and that. Plus having to deal with Brexit. I mean, he had the recession to deal with, but by comparison, like what she's trying to do is, well, I mean, we think it's fairly impossible.
You can feel sorry for Theresa May, and like anybody in her position would be having a lot of trouble. But on the flip side, I think you could say that she's made it difficult for herself with what she did as leader before. Many people have said that she has struck quite a adversarial tone against, Remainers, against the 48%, the Crush the Saboteurs headline that went out with her face there when she called the general election that she expected to win in a landslide so she could pursue a harder Brexit. That sort of ruined her faith amongst people who thought she may strike a more conciliatory tone and move to the centre. If she was a Prime Minister that had worked with the opposition from the start, tried to build a consensus, it would certainly be a softer Brexit, but it may be a softer Brexit that got passed with the will of the majority of Labour and Conservative MPs with a few rebels on the side. Her tactic of trying to court the DUP and the ERG unsuccessfully, as it appears now, has left her in this position. So, I am sorry for her and that she's going through this, but she has only partly got herself to blame as well for getting herself in this position in the first place.
People have been discussing, is she trying to run out the clock, all of this kind of stuff. So, I think she has a strategy, but it's not working in the favour of her deal. And therefore, it is very much self-imposed problems. And I feel like there could have been some backpedaling earlier, maybe to make something else happen. But, yeah, there we go. So, no general election. Theresa May probably not standing down. Where does this kind of leave it? You think we're going into an extension. What can we do with an extension? Let's just assume, take it as read that the EU probably will allow us to do it because no deal they're not a fan of as well. What are we going to do with that 3 months, in their opinion? I think there probably are a few options people have heard bandied around. But what are our options in those 3 months?
So one option that we've got that's just been mentioned in the chat, that wasn't mentioned by anyone after the House of Commons vote tonight, is a people's vote. So that's what Labour have sort of said they might do, but wasn't mentioned by Jeremy Corbyn this evening. I know those part of the TIG group or the independent group have been pushing for a people's vote, and that certainly would in one way give us a definitive answer on if we want to stay in the EU or go out. That's one option that the Prime Minister could turn to. I think she even mentioned it in her closing remark that she may have to go to that option. That was greeted by many cheers by one side, and then once the other side had realised what the other side were cheering for, they started to boo "No" across the hall. So I think it's fair to say that opinion on that matter within Parliament is also split. But that certainly would be one surefire way for us to use our extension time. It would give a definitive answer to whether we still want in or out. It would take it out of the MPs' hands, as it were, and put it back to the people. So it would, get rid of their responsibility. And if we voted to remain, then this whole Brexit thing, it doesn't go away, but we can do the British thing of, that was all very awkward. Let's pretend it never happened and move on with our lives. I'd certainly like to do that. So yes, that would be one option. As a user in the chat says, it would be a plan. The EU would look at that and go, yes, I can see why you need a 3-6 month extension to organise this referendum. We're happy that you go ahead and do that. So that would actually be a feasible method, I think, to break the deadlock.
Yeah. So we've discussed, a bit. Let me start again. We've discussed and touched on a bit before about the people's vote. what would be the question you would put on it? I mean, obviously not necessarily, but what is the key question you think that people's vote should ask? Because there are some people who want to be like, there are some people who essentially want to run the referendum again, and we've discussed how we feel that probably not enough has changed to make that much different. And even if it did go in the favour of Remain, it might still only be by a small margin. You'd have the same arguments back and forth. What do you think the people's vote question should be?
I think the only feasible vote that can go to the people, it would have to be a yes or no answer. It would be, do you support Theresa May's deal, the one that has gone to the Commons, the one that is already approved by the EU, or do you want to reject that and remain within the European Union? That would be my call, because that's a clear vote between Leave and Remain. Those are the two options on the table, and there is a clear plan for each of them. If you vote for Theresa May's deal, then that just happens. Boom, we're out. You follow that white paper, that's in place. Equally, if you choose to remain, then we carry on as normal. We haven't left the EU yet. Everything's still in place. Life goes on. So that would be the easiest referendum to have. If it's the referendum that the Labour Party or the Conservative Party want to propose to the people, that's an entirely different question. But that's the one I would choose to run.
Yeah, and I think, I think a lot of people seem to want us just to rerun the referendum, and I think we've touched on before in previous episodes why that might not go the way people think it will go. I think that applies to whatever way you voted the first time around, because I think people have got entrenched in their camps post the Brexit referendum, and I worry that it's been as polarising as people might expect. It split the country down the middle, and people have gone further away from the centre ground, and there are people in the middle who are like getting bored of, most people are bored of Brexit at this stage, other than the fact that we have to be invested in it because it affects our futures. But I think there's very much even though we know what Brexit would be now, I think there's a lot of people who are still like, well, we're going to do it anyway. So I don't think it would necessarily be a sudden swing one way or the other if we went for that vote. It would be interesting to see, but I don't think it's the thing we should try running, because I think repeated referendums is going to be a real problem.
Yes, but to be honest, with the deadlock in Parliament, I'm starting to feel it's the only realistic option to break that. Because it's a far clearer referendum than the one we ran in 2015, certainly. And yeah, I would be more inclined to respect the result of that referendum than I would the first, purely because everybody knows what they're voting for in that case. As I mentioned before, it's a tough one. I think the other point I was going to mention was that I think people's faith in politicians and Parliament to get things done is being shaken by this whole process, both on the Leave and Remain side. That the deadlock is making people think, well, why do we even have parliamentarians in the first place? Why do we have MPs if they can't enforce the will of the people, or if they can't even decide to get anything through? So again, putting that vote to the people would maybe restore a bit of faith in democracy. Whichever way it goes, you'd have to respect the result, and both results would be easily put into place. I know, so I'm going round in circles with this argument, but it feels like that's the only option for me.
I know they have to go for these kind of hot takes from a member of the public on the news. In the middle of the live stream of BBC stuff, there's someone, a Remainer, who's like, I can't believe they've not come to a deal by the date. And I think, this echoes stuff we were talking about when the actual Article 50 was invoked. 2 years isn't enough time. And then last year when we started the podcast, 1 year is not enough time. And that's always been what we've been saying. And it seems like, yes, that has been borne out.
So there's the no deal vote, then there's the vote on extending Article 50. If we agree not to extend Article 50, I think it's worth pointing out that we would then default to no deal. So we would leave on at the end of the month. And Theresa May says tomorrow her party will outline what procedures will follow if we decide to go ahead with that motion. So what policies the government will put in place. These policies wouldn't be able to be voted on by Parliament. They wouldn't be able to influence them anyway. Government just says, this is what we got to do. So I think it's worth pointing out that that is another possibility. And at the moment, the only power that the government has is to look for a solution that puts all the power within the government where they don't have to take it to a vote in Parliament. Because at the moment, Theresa May is captain of a ship and can't steer it in any direction that she wants. Everybody on the ship is having their say and trying to pull it which way or the other. And the iceberg's ahead, and we're just heading towards that iceberg. We all agree that the iceberg is bad, that we want to avoid it, but nobody can decide if they want to turn left or right. And the captain cannot steer it. She must rely on the votes of all of her crew. If I've laboured this analogy too much, please let me know.
On that note of them releasing kind of details, there has already been an article up that will be in the show notes. The plan for the Irish border, if there is no deal, will be published. So my view of this is very much kind of, we know that 10 DUP MPs voted against a deal this evening, and I feel like this is another look how bad it could be to them, because obviously all the things we discussed before, whether there be a hard border, which obviously no one wants. There's a brilliant video we shared earlier in the week by CGP Grey about kind of the logical inconsistencies of wanting a wall somewhere around the UK, but we're still physically linked on the island of Ireland, which is a fun sentence to say quickly. So, yeah, it's not great. One of our listeners is Irish and noting that the Troubles have already kind of started, which is not good. We don't want those kind of things happening again. That was awful, as we've mentioned before. But I think that's maybe what the idea behind that is to be like, this is what would happen because there's no other solution, and then maybe hope that they would come into line. But that's still only 10 votes for. Someone else in the chat also mentioned that shared a tweet talking about a meaningful vote 3. Do you think that's going to happen? Is she just trying to run out the clock and force people to agree again, but there's no changes?
She may do. That's, again, they might get an extension and say, no, you've really got to vote for the deal next time. But my personal opinion is that the EU would be unhappy with that being the reason. If I was the EU, I would turn around and say, what, are you going to give the same deal again? The same deal that your parliament has rejected 2 times in a row decisively? No, I can't accept that because I know that's going to fail. And what, are we just going to keep giving you an extension until there's a general election, until there's a new parliament in that may vote for the deal? I think if Theresa May goes for meaningful vote 3 with exactly the same plan again, then her days really are numbered as PM. Personally, I can't see how she really carries on after tonight. She will, because we've only got a couple of weeks until Brexit, and that's probably the only reason that she's staying where she is now, because in any other normal period of history, I think we would have seen the back of Theresa May a lot sooner. Yes, there was... So the EU doesn't want us to leave with no deal because they want money from us. That's one reason I think the EU has been pretty open in the fact that they would prefer a withdrawal agreement rather than no deal. But I don't think they will be held hostage by the money element. The same reason why the UK has said they don't really want to be held hostage by the money thing either. So one option that was floated today was that we accept Theresa May's deal and then go into the backstop, right? While we're in the backstop trying to get things sorted with Ireland, we don't have to pay the EU any money. But we're still in the EU quite a bit, so therefore we'd be getting all the benefits of the EU and not having to pay a penny. Do you get that logic?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. To which Barnier quickly responded on Twitter that logic was nonsense, and no, if that happened within the backstop, we'd still have to pay up. So that's been pretty quickly dismissed, but it was one sort of loophole that Brexiteers thought they could get around, or one loophole that they thought would be able to, extend the transition or help, persuade hard Brexiteers that this was a way to get one over on the EU. So that's certainly one way money might come into it. But no, I think the EU would, as we've been willing to reject as we've been willing to keep no deal on the table, I think EU would also be willing to keep no deal on the table, as just letting them know that they're prepared to play hardball with us if everything goes wrong and we can't get everything together.
So some quick real-time follow-up on a few of the things you mentioned. We had an update that from an Irish listener that visiting Belfast, that there's obvious tension now, and that's what we wanted to avoid. And we don't want to go back to that time. I think we've stressed that enough times. It was no good for anyone. So I can't believe we're kind of letting that slip and almost happening. And I mean, I can understand why both the DUP and would be annoyed about things. But yeah, it's worrying that we're getting so close to screwing that up. It's not something anyone wants back. And then Meaningful Vote 3, a tweet about how it was discussed in Cabinet today, talking about Leadsom and Grayling. I feel like if something's being led forward by Leadsom and Grayling, that's probably not a great sign. But yes, basically following on from what I mentioned earlier, that maybe the idea of saying, oh, look, here's what the Irish border would look like, and other things, like by releasing all the various plans about no deal tomorrow, it will scare people into actually agreeing with the deal that's been presented. I'm not sure how much of an effect that'll have unless all of those plans are absolute doom and gloom. I can assume, I haven't been told directly, but yes, I can assume based on what I've heard that basically they're pulling people off everything within the civil service at the moment. It's been ramping up, but they are in between a rock and a hard place now, trying to make plans without actually knowing where everything's going. But obviously they're planning for the worst.
It's a terrible, it's a hell of a scenario to be in, and the breaking news that our only hope is a team led by Christopher Grayling and Andrea Leadsom leads me to believe this country is doomed. It's like the worst superhero duo that you could ever put together. It's people who's... I don't know, it's really unfair to pick on certain politicians, but those two in particular are the ones where they're not even... I don't even have the ideological sort of distaste for them that I do with Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg. I think if at least it was Boris and Jacob, that they'd at least do something. With Leadsom and Grayling, I just feel that they'd go to announce whatever they would, and the paper would just set on fire spontaneously in front of them. Or, Grayling fell on the mace and undid years of constitutional work in the process. It's just, that's the news I really didn't need at this point, Tom. Just so you're aware. That's shaken me to my core more than any meaningful vote could have done so tonight.
Is there anything else you want to discuss? I know these are live episodes tend to be shorter, but
no, I don't think there is anything more to discuss. Somebody on the BBC said this earlier tonight, that if anybody tells you that they know what's going to happen in the next few days, they are lying. So I will stress that with the utmost importance, that everything we've discussed tonight is kind of conjecture, hypothetical situations. They all could come into being. There is always that possibility, but Parliament has never been crazier, in my opinion. We've never had this much sort of lack of knowledge of what's going to happen next. We've always had procedures in place in the UK that means that if the Parliament isn't functioning, we can move on, have another vote, and try a different combination of things to get it through. That's not happening. We are stuck once again in this situation. So apologies in advance if we keep giving you the same episode in 2 weeks' time, if we are still in this situation. But these things need to be discussed, and every time we present something like this, I hope that Parliament has come to a slightly different conclusion, or has worked out some way of at least moving forward with this Brexit process.
Stockpile beans are my advice. The advice I've heard is stockpile loo roll, because we don't produce enough of our own. I know that I have about a 3-month supply arriving from Amazon tomorrow. So, so if that's all we want to talk about on this, we'll move into our quick polls update.
Oh yes, let's do that.
Have you got that open yet?
I haven't got that open. No, let me just grab
let me spin you a story, dear listener.
Ooh, okay.
I can't remember exactly when we last looked, but I think we were shocked that it was going Conservatives' way. 1st of February, Conservatives +7. 4th of February, Conservatives +7. 5th of February, tie. 8th of February, Conservatives +3. 11th of February, Conservatives +5. 15th of February, tie. And the ties are different polls in both of those. There's Opinion and Ipsos Mori. 18th of February, Con +4. 19th of February, Con +8. 23rd of February, Con +7. 25th of February, Con +11. And 1st of March, Con +6. I can't believe that this is all swinging towards the Conservatives so much, considering what a mess they're making of everything. But I think this kind of ties into previous things we've said about people's view of Labour at the moment, that Corbyn's kind of a bit rudderless, I suppose.
It's madness. Those figures, just having seen them for themselves, Conservatives +11. This is the party that was worried that it might split on the result of tonight's vote. It's the one that is really worried for its future if it's unable to unite on Brexit. Any other time, they would be way down. So the fact that Labour is, I know it's one poll, and you should always look at the average, but it is very worrying that they are 11 points behind in that YouGov poll. Trying to do some quick maths in my head. I can't remember if the independent group, it must be said, is messing up polls for Labour at the moment. It certainly seems to have taken more votes away from Labour than it does Conservative. So that might be inflating the Conservative score a little bit more. And if the Conservative Party was to split, then that's where we might see a more sort of like levelling out of that playing field. However, it's an unfortunate and depressing remark on the state of the Labour Party at the moment, that they are unable to, rise and sort of present that alternative to say, no, we are the party to get through Brexit, because that's what a good opposition would do. They would capitalise on this political distress. But at the moment, they just seem unable to do so, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's interesting because, as you said, at the moment, these polls don't track the independent group at all. I don't know how long something has to. I mean, I suppose they're not technically a party. But the polls don't say that they only have parties. I mean, based on some of the things we saw, the estimates we saw last week, they'd be higher than the Greens. And the Greens are still on that list. I don't know at what point Britain Elects will decide that they have to add in the independent group, but it will be interesting to see if they start getting that data regularly.
It's one. If a general election is called, you'll see them. I think that's the one thing that would definitely prompt them to be in there. But it's up to the independent group if they want to start getting more MPs or getting more people interested in standing in multiple constituencies. As soon as they do that, then they will be considered as a proper political party and will feature in the polling.
It was mentioned in the chat earlier, but we didn't kind of have time to circle back to it, that the independent group could very well be destroyed by a general election entirely, if people decide not to vote for them because they no longer have a party affiliation, and they probably wouldn't have enough time to build up an image as if they decide they're going to be a party called the Independent Group, or even the Independent Party. Tip, what a great name. If they did that, I still think there are enough people who are annoyed about them jumping ship from their various parties and so on, or who would choose to vote their local parties for the local candidate of the party they normally vote for. So a general election would probably wipe them out if it happened right now. I think that would be a reasonable guess. Maybe one or two of them would survive. As you said, Chuka Umunna is very likely to stay on just because of the sheer number of votes he got. But maybe people would change their minds now he's not Labour. We don't know. So that was our quick poll update. Little bit of news here. We will be carrying on with our fortnightly normal releases, but I'm very glad to report we have an Indonesian correspondent who I recorded some background on the upcoming Indonesian general election that is middle of April, 17th of April. So we're going to have a special episode that I'll release because I want to get this episode that's being recorded now out as soon as possible. That will probably go out between our normal episodes, so at the weekend or maybe early next week, which is a summary of kind of the state of Indonesian politics going into this general election. And then I think we'll have a small segment about the run-up to the election before April 17th, and then our main episode after April 17th will be discussion of that as a kind of palate cleanser after Brexit, because either we'll have left by then and we'll want to talk about something else, or we'll have extended and we'll probably want to talk about something else in the short term. So I think that's the plan for that. So as always, thank you for joining us. Special thanks to our listeners who came in live. You can always do that on Discord. You can find the link in the show notes. You can also find us online at parliamentary.observer, where you'll find all our episodes and show notes. You can find us on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at unparlpodcast. And you can find us on Reddit at /r/unparliamentary. If you want to give us some money to help fund, microphones, things to keep this going, at the moment, this is basically run entirely out of my own pocket. So if you want to help us with our various podcasts we run, come along to our Patreon and support us there. And you'll have our undying gratitude, and we'll come up with some rewards. Yeah, rewards.
What about if we fund a trip to Indonesia so we can report live from Indonesia?
In the next few weeks, that's very unlikely unless someone has bought an MRI scanner and hasn't told me.
Damn. Okay, fair enough. I just thought I'd put it out there, but never mind.
Thank you, everyone. And as always, it's good night from me.
And it's a good night from him. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, accidentally hits microphone.
Smooth. What you said earlier reminded me of a joke, so I'll just start off with a bad joke, so things can only get better from here. But what did Mario say to Princess Peach when they broke up?
I don't know. What did Mario say to Princess Peach when they broke up?
It's not you, it's a me, Mario.
That is dreadful. Thank you for bringing it to us.
I got an oof. Okay, that's great. My night's been made. Let's go.